The fluorescent lights in interview room 3 cast harsh shadows across the pale yellow walls, creating an atmosphere that felt more like an interrogation chamber than a safe space for children. Detective Sarah Chun adjusted the temperature for the third time, hoping the slight warmth might coax 3-year-old Emma Rodriguez out of her protective shell. But the tiny girl remained curled in the corner chair, her knees drawn to her chest, clutching a threadbare teddy bear that had seen better days. 6 weeks. 42 days of complete silence since that horrific night when Mrs. Patterson from apartment 2B called 911, her voice shaking as she reported the sounds of a child screaming through the thin walls. 6 weeks since the paramedics found Emma cowering under her bed, her small body bearing wounds that would haunt seasoned officers for years to come. Detective Chun had worked child abuse cases for 8 years, but Emma's case was different. Most children, even after severe trauma, eventually showed some sign of communication, a nod, a gesture, tears. Emma had retreated so far into herself that she seemed almost ghost-like, present in body but absent in spirit. Her large brown eyes, once bright with childhood wonder according to old photographs, now held a depth of pain that no 3-year-old should ever know. The medical report lay open on Detective Chun's lap, its clinical language unable to mask the horror of what had been done to this innocent child. 12 cigarette burns on her arms and back, arranged in deliberate patterns. That spoke of calculated cruelty rather than random violence. 3 healed rib fractures at different stages of healing, indicating months of systematic abuse. Bruises on her throat in the distinctive shape of adult handprints. Severe malnutrition that had stunted her growth and left her weighing barely 25 pounds. But it was the psychological damage that concerned everyone most. Dr. Amanda Torres, the child psychologist assigned to Emma's case, had explained that selective mutism was common in severely traumatized children. The brain, overwhelmed by terror, simply shut down non-essential functions to survive. Emma's voice had become a casualty of her survival instinct. She's protecting herself the only way she knows how, Dr. Torres had explained during their last consultation. Speaking means remembering. Remembering means reliving. So her mind has chosen silence as her shield. Detective Chun leaned forward, slightly, careful not to invade Emma's space. "Hello, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I brought you some new crayons today. Would you like to draw something?" Emma's eyes flickered toward the box of 64 Crayola crayons, the kind with the built-in sharpener that most children her age found magical. For a moment, Detective Chun saw a spark of interest, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Emma pulled her teddy bear closer and turned her face toward the wall. The teddy bear was Emma's only constant companion, a brown and tan creature missing one eye and most of its fur. Child Protective Services had found it clutched in her arms that night, and no force on earth could separate them now. The medical staff at Children's Hospital had tried to wash it, but Emma's screams of terror had been so profound that they abandoned the attempt. Now the bear served as both comfort object and witness to her ordeal. Down the hall, Marcus Webb sat in holding Cell C4, awaiting his arraignment on charges of aggravated child abuse, torture, and endangering the welfare of a minor. Webb's transformation from loving stepfather to monster had been swift and brutal. Neighbors described him as charming and attentive when he first moved in with Emma's mother, Sofia Rodriguez, 8 months ago. He brought Emma flowers, read her bedtime stories, and seemed to dote on his new stepdaughter. But behind closed doors, Webb revealed his true nature. The abuse began small, a slap for spilling juice, a harsh word for crying. But it escalated with terrifying speed. Emma's mother, working double shifts as a hotel housekeeper to support her small family, often returned home too exhausted to notice the subtle changes in her daughter's behavior. The bruises Webb inflicted were carefully placed where clothing would hide them. The emotional abuse was even more insidious, as Webb convinced Emma that speaking about their special games would result in her mother being taken away forever. Detective Chun had interviewed Webb multiple times since his arrest, and each session left her feeling like she needed a shower. The man showed no remorse, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. He maintained his innocence with a smugness that made her skin crawl, confident that his expensive attorney would find a way to discredit the evidence and secure his freedom. Rebecca Stone was indeed a formidable opponent. Known throughout Riverside County as the Shark, she had built her reputation on getting violent criminals acquitted through aggressive tactics and legal technicalities. Stone had already filed motions challenging the search warrant, the chain of custody for physical evidence, and the competency of the investigating officers. She was systematically dismantling the prosecution's case, piece by piece. District Attorney Michael Harrison had made it clear during their last meeting, without Emma's testimony, the physical evidence might not be enough for a conviction. Defense attorneys could argue that the injuries were accidental, that Emma was clumsy, that the cigarette burns were the result of careless accidents around ashtrays. They needed Emma to point at Marcus Webb and identify him as her abuser. They needed her voice. But as Detective Chun sat in that sterile room, watching this broken child rock slowly back and forth while humming a tuneless melody to her teddy bear, the task seemed impossible. How do you ask a 3-year-old to relive her worst nightmare? How do you explain to someone so young that her words could be the key to justice? How do you reach a child who has buried her voice so deep that even she might not be able to find it again? The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence, each second marking time toward Webb's preliminary hearing. If they couldn't break through Emma's protective silence soon, a monster would walk free and other children would be at risk. Detective Chun closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to whatever forces might be listening. Please help this little angel find her voice before it's too late. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but District Attorney Michael Harrison barely noticed as he spread the case files across his mahogany desk like a general planning a war. The fluorescent lights of his corner office cast everything in stark relief: police photographs, medical reports, witness statements, all painting a horrific picture of what Marcus Webb had done to 3-year-old Emma Rodriguez. But pictures and reports wouldn't be enough. Not against Rebecca Stone. Harrison's phone buzzed with another urgent message from his assistant. Stone filed 3 more motions. Judge wants response by 5 p.m. He glanced at the wall clock. 2:47 p.m. Less than 3 hours to craft legal arguments. That could save a child's life and put a monster behind bars. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning, just 72 hours away. If Stone succeeded in getting the evidence suppressed, Webb would walk free before the weekend. The thought made Harrison's stomach turn. In his 15 years as a prosecutor, he'd never felt pressure like this. Legal researcher James Park burst through the door, his usually neat appearance disheveled from 3 consecutive all-nighters. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his shirt was wrinkled beyond recognition. "Michael, we have a problem," he announced, dropping a stack of legal precedents on the desk. "I've searched every database, every case law archive, from coast to coast. No child under 4 years old has ever been permitted to testify in a California criminal court. Ever." Harrison felt his heart sink. What about other states? "Found 3 cases nationwide," Park continued, flipping through his notes. "Texas allowed a 3-year-old in 2019, but that was civil court, not criminal. Michigan had a 4-year-old testify in 2020, but the conviction was overturned on appeal. Oregon tried with a 3.5-year-old last year case, was dismissed when the child couldn't handle cross-examination. The implications were staggering. They weren't just fighting for Emma's justice. They were potentially setting legal precedent that could affect thousands of young victims across the country. The weight of responsibility pressed down on Harrison like a physical force. A knock at the door interrupted his spiraling thoughts. "Come in," he called, straightening his tie. Sofia Rodriguez entered hesitantly, her eyes red from crying and her hands trembling as she clutched a tissue. Emma's mother looked years older than her 26 years, worn down by guilt and grief that had aged her beyond recognition. Behind her walked Child Protective Services Supervisor Lisa Martinez, carrying a thick file that represented the bureaucratic side of Emma's nightmare. "Mrs. Rodriguez wanted to speak with you personally," Martinez explained, guiding Sofia to a chair. "She has something important to tell you about Marcus." Sofia's voice was barely a whisper when she began to speak. "I should have known," she said, tears streaming down her face. "God help me. I should have seen the signs. But he was so perfect at first." Marcus brought Emma little gifts, everyday flowers from the gas station, coloring books, those cheap toys from the dollar store. She loved him instantly. Harrison leaned forward, recognizing the classic pattern of predatory behavior. "When did things change?" "About 2 months after we got married," Sofia continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Emma started having nightmares. She'd wake up screaming, but when I asked what was wrong, she'd just say she was scared of the dark. Marcus suggested we get her a nightlight, said he'd sit with her until she fell asleep. I thought he was being so caring." Lisa Martinez opened her file, revealing photographs and documentation that told a different story. "We now know those bedtime visits were when the abuse began," she explained clinically. Webb used his position of trust to normalize inappropriate contact, gradually escalating the violence while convincing Emma that telling anyone would result in her mother being taken away. The manipulation was textbook predator behavior, but that didn't make it any less sickening. Harrison had seen it countless times. Abusers who targeted single mothers gained their trust, then used that access to harm their children. What made Webb particularly dangerous was his patience and calculation. "There's more," Sofia continued, her voice barely audible. "Last week, I received a call from his ex-wife in Nevada. She saw the news coverage and called to warn me. Marcus had done the same thing to her daughter 5 years ago. She tried to press charges, but she trailed off, unable to finish." "But what?" Harrison pressed gently. "The little girl was only 2, Martinez finished for her. Too young to testify. The case was dismissed for lack of evidence. Webb moved to California shortly after. The pattern was becoming clear. Webb was a serial predator who specifically targeted families with very young children, knowing they would be unable to testify against him. He'd perfected his system, leaving a trail of broken families across state lines while remaining legally untouchable. Harrison's assistant knocked and entered without waiting for permission. "Sir, Stone just held a press conference on the courthouse steps. She's claiming prosecutorial misconduct and demanding all charges be dropped immediately." On the television, mounted in the corner, Rebecca Stone stood before a bank of microphones, her platinum blonde hair perfectly styled despite the afternoon heat. Her voice dripped with manufactured outrage as she spoke. "My client is the victim of a rush to judgment by overzealous prosecutors desperate for headlines. The so-called evidence against Mr. Webb was obtained through illegal searches and contaminated by improper handling. More importantly, the state intends to base their case on the testimony of a traumatized 3-year-old child who hasn't spoken a single word in 6 weeks. This is not justice, this is persecution." The assembled reporters scribbled notes furiously as Stone continued her assault on the prosecution's case. Children that young cannot distinguish between fantasy and reality. They cannot understand the difference between truth and lies. To subject an already traumatized child to the ordeal of cross-examination is nothing short of abuse by the state itself. Harrison muted the television, his jaw clenched with anger. Stone was already poisoning potential jurors, painting the prosecution as child abusers while positioning her client as the real victim. It was a masterful legal strategy, but it made Harrison sick. "We need Emma to speak," he said finally, the words hanging heavy in the air. "Without her testimony, Stone will systematically destroy every piece of evidence we have," she claimed. The physical injuries were accidents, that the medical examinations were contaminated, that our investigation was biased from the start. "We need Emma to look at Webb and identify him as her abuser." Sophia looked up through her tears. "But she won't talk to anyone. She barely acknowledges that people exist anymore. How can you ask her to testify when she can't even say her own name?" Harrison didn't have an answer. In the silence that followed, the clock on the wall seemed to tick louder, each second bringing them closer to Thursday morning, when justice would either prevail or crumble under the weight of legal technicalities. Somewhere in the city, Marcus Webb sat in his cell, probably confident that his expensive lawyer would secure his freedom within days. The thought of that monster walking free, possibly to harm other children, filled Harrison with a determination that burned like fire in his chest. They had 72 hours to find Emma's voice. 72 hours to pierce through 6 weeks of traumatic silence. 72 hours to save not just one little girl, but potentially countless other children who would cross Webb's path if he escaped justice. The race against time had begun, and failure was not an option. Dr. Amanda Torres adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses and leaned back in her ergonomic chair, studying the case file that had consumed her thoughts for weeks. Emma Rodriguez's psychological profile painted a picture of trauma so severe that traditional therapy methods seemed almost laughably inadequate. The child had constructed walls around her psyche so impenetrable that 6 weeks of gentle coaxing hadn't produced so much as a whispered syllable. "We need to try something different," she murmured to herself, tapping her pen against the manila folder. Outside her office window at the Children's Advocacy Center, she could see other young clients playing in the therapeutic garden, their laughter a stark contrast to Emma's profound silence. Most of these children had found their voices again after weeks or months of treatment, but Emma remained locked in her protective cocoon of muteness. Dr. Torres had tried everything in her extensive toolkit: play therapy with dolls and puppets, art therapy with crayons and finger paints, even music therapy with gentle lullabies. Emma participated mechanically, going through the motions without any emotional engagement. She colored within the lines with obsessive precision, arranged puzzle pieces with mathematical accuracy, and stacked blocks in perfect symmetrical towers. But she never spoke, never smiled, never showed any sign that her spirit still lived behind those haunted brown eyes. The breakthrough came during her consultation with Dr. Robert Kim from UCLA, a nationally recognized expert in childhood trauma. "Have you considered animal-assisted therapy?" he asked during their video conference. Sometimes when children can't trust humans anymore, they can still connect with animals. There's something about the unconditional acceptance and non-judgmental presence of therapy animals that can reach places traditional therapy cannot. "We don't have a therapy animal program here," Dr. Torres replied, but her mind was already racing with possibilities. "Actually, you do," Dr. Kim smiled mysteriously. "Or rather, the courthouse does. I consulted on a program they started 6 months ago, specifically for cases like this. There's a golden retriever named Justice who's been specially trained to work with traumatized children during legal proceedings." Within an hour, Dr. Torres was on the phone with Officer Maria Santos, the handler for the courthouse's therapy dog program. Santos's voice carried a warmth that immediately put Dr. Torres at ease. Justice has been working miracles with kids who've been through the unthinkable, she explained. He's not just a therapy dog, he's been trained specifically to sense emotional distress and provide comfort during high-stress situations like testimony and legal proceedings. Tell me about him, Dr. Torres requested, already envisioning the possibilities. He's 3 years old, a golden retriever with the most intuitive personality I've ever seen in a dog. Santos began, her affection for the animal evident in her voice. We got him as a puppy from a breeder who specializes in therapy animals. His temperament testing showed remarkable empathy and emotional intelligence. The training took 18 months, basic obedience, advanced emotional support techniques, desensitization to courtroom environments, and specialized protocols for working with trauma victims. Santos explained that Justice had already helped 23 children find the courage to testify in cases ranging from domestic violence to sexual abuse. His success rate was unprecedented. Children who had been completely nonverbal for months would suddenly begin speaking when Justice was present. There was something almost magical about his ability to create a safe space in even the most intimidating environments. Can we arrange a meeting with Emma? Dr. Torres asked, hope creeping into her voice for the first time in weeks. I'll bring Justice to the center tomorrow morning, Santos agreed. But I need to warn you, we never force interactions. Justice works on the child's timeline, not ours. Some kids connect immediately, others take weeks to trust him. The next morning, Dr. Torres prepared interview room 3 with extra care. She dimmed the harsh fluorescent lights, arranged comfortable floor cushions in a circle, and placed Emma's favorite toys within easy reach. When Emma arrived with her ever-present teddy bear, she took her usual position in the corner chair, knees drawn up defensively. 20 minutes later, Officer Santos entered quietly with Justice at her side. The golden retriever was magnificent. His coat gleamed like spun gold. His intelligent brown eyes seemed to take in every detail of the room, and his presence radiated calm authority. He wore a blue service vest that identified him as a working therapy animal. Emma's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. The moment she saw Justice, her entire body tensed as she pressed herself harder against the wall. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, classic signs of panic response. Dr. Torres felt her heart sink, wondering if this intervention had been a terrible mistake. But Justice's training kicked in immediately. Instead of approaching Emma, or even acknowledging her presence, he simply lay down in the center of the room, about 10 feet away from her chair. He positioned himself so that Emma could see him clearly, but didn't feel cornered or threatened. Then he did something remarkable. He closed his eyes and began to breathe slowly and deeply, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm so peaceful, it seemed to calm the very air in the room. Santos spoke in barely audible whispers, explaining Justice's technique. He's modeling relaxation behavior. Children unconsciously mirror the emotional states of those around them. By demonstrating complete calm and safety, he's teaching Emma that this space is secure. For the first 15 minutes, nothing happened. Emma remained frozen in her defensive position, while Justice lay motionless, except for his steady breathing. Dr. Torres began to wonder if this was another failed attempt. Then something shifted. Emma's breathing began to match Justice's rhythm, slow and steady. Her shoulders, which had been hunched with tension, began to relax fractionally. Most remarkably, her eyes never left Justice's still form. He's beautiful, Dr. Torres whispered to Santos, careful not to break the spell. Watch his ears, Santos replied quietly. He's monitoring every sound Emma makes, every shift in her body language. Even with his eyes closed, he's completely aware of her emotional state. As if to prove Santos's point, Justice's left ear twitched slightly when Emma made the tiniest movement, barely perceptible uncurling of her fingers from around her teddy bear. The dog's response was immediate but subtle. His tail gave one gentle wag against the floor, a sign of acknowledgement without threat. By the end of the 45-minute session, Emma had made no overt moves toward Justice, but the change in her demeanor was unmistakable. The rigid terror that usually defined her posture had softened into simple wariness. When it was time for Justice to leave, Emma watched intently as Santos gently called him to heel. "Same time tomorrow?" Santos asked as they prepared to go. "Absolutely," Dr. Torres replied, studying Emma's face for any reaction to the scheduling discussion. For just a moment, she could swear she saw disappointment flash across the child's features when Justice disappeared through the doorway. That night, Dr. Torres updated Emma's file with cautious optimism. For the first time since the abuse had been discovered, Emma had shown genuine emotional response to something other than fear. It wasn't much a softening of posture, a change in breathing pattern, a flicker of interest in her eyes. But it was something. More importantly, it was hope. And in a case that had seemed increasingly hopeless, that tiny spark of possibility felt like a miracle in the making. Justice had entered their lives, and Emma Rodriguez's long journey back to her voice had finally begun. The morning of Emma's fourth session with Justice dawned gray and overcast, matching Dr. Amanda Torres's cautious mood as she prepared interview room 3. 3 sessions had yielded subtle progress. Emma's breathing had stabilized. Her defensive posture had softened slightly, and she'd begun stealing glances at Justice when she thought no one was looking. But they still hadn't heard her voice, and time was running short. District Attorney Harrison had called twice that morning, his desperation evident even through his professional composure. The preliminary hearing was just 5 days away, and Rebecca Stone had filed yet another motion challenging the admissibility of any potential testimony from Emma. The legal vultures were circling, and they needed a breakthrough fast. Officer Maria Santos arrived precisely at 9 a.m. with Justice, padding silently beside her. The golden retriever had developed his own routine over the past sessions, entering the room with calm dignity and positioning himself in what had become his spot, close enough to Emma to provide comfort, far enough away to avoid overwhelming her fragile psyche. Emma sat in her usual corner chair, her threadbare teddy bear clutched to her chest like armor. But Dr. Torres noticed something different this morning. Emma's eyes went immediately to Justice as he entered, and for the first time, there was no visible flinch of fear. Progress, however small, was still progress. "Good morning, Emma," Dr. Torres said softly, settling onto a floor cushion nearby. "Justice came to visit you again today. He's been looking forward to seeing you." For 20 minutes, they maintained their established pattern, Justice lying peacefully in the center of the room, Emma observing from her safe distance, Santos, and Dr. Torres providing quiet commentary about the dog's gentle nature. The rhythm had become almost meditative, a stark contrast to the chaos and violence that had shattered Emma's world. Then something extraordinary happened. Emma's teddy bear slipped from her small fingers and tumbled to the floor, landing with a soft thud between her chair and Justice's resting spot. In the past, such an occurrence would have triggered immediate panic. Emma would scramble to retrieve her precious companion. Her breathing would accelerate, and she'd retreat deeper into her protective shell. But this time was different. Emma stared at the bear, then at Justice, conflict clear in her dark eyes. She wanted her teddy back, but retrieving it would mean leaving the safety of her chair and venturing closer to the dog who had occupied her thoughts for days. Justice, displaying the intuitive intelligence that made him such an exceptional therapy animal, sensed Emma's dilemma immediately. Without any command from Santos, he lifted his massive head and looked directly at the fallen teddy bear. Then, moving with deliberate slowness, he rose to his feet and padded over to the toy. Emma's breath caught in her throat as Justice gently grasped the bear in his mouth, his teeth barely touching the worn fabric. With infinite care, he walked toward Emma's chair and placed the teddy bear on the floor just within her reach, then backed away respectfully. The silence that followed was electric with possibility. Emma stared at her returned companion, then at Justice, who had resumed his peaceful position, but now watched her with warm, intelligent eyes. For the first time in 6 weeks, Emma Rodriguez opened her mouth and spoke. "Doggy." The single word fell into the room like a stone into still water, creating ripples of shock and joy. Dr. Torres felt tears spring to her eyes, while Santos had to grip her chair to keep from gasping aloud. Emma had spoken. After 42 days of silence, she had found her voice. But Justice wasn't finished with his magic. As if recognizing the monumental nature of what had just occurred, he gave his tail one gentle wag and made a soft, encouraging sound, not quite a bark, more like a conversational comment. Emma's response was immediate and miraculous. A smile the first anyone had seen since a rescue flickered across her tiny face. "Nice doggy," she whispered, her voice barely audible but clear as crystal. Over the following days, Emma's sessions with Justice became the highlight of everyone's schedule. Word spread quickly through the Children's Advocacy Center about the breakthrough, and suddenly, the formerly quiet hallways buzzed with excitement and hope. Emma's vocabulary expanded slowly, but steadily, soft, friend, pretty, each word. A victory worth celebrating. Dr. Torres documented every interaction meticulously, knowing that Emma's progress would need to withstand intense legal scrutiny. She observed that Emma only spoke when Justice was present. Attempts to encourage conversation during individual sessions still met with silence. The dog had become Emma's emotional anchor, the key that unlocked her traumatized psyche. Meanwhile, the legal battle intensified. Rebecca Stone, sensing that the prosecution might have found a way to get Emma to testify, launched a preemptive strike. She filed motions arguing that any statements made by Emma were the result of improper coaching and emotional manipulation through the use of therapy animals. She painted Justice's presence as prejudicial, claiming that the dog was a prop designed to garner jury sympathy rather than uncover truth. Child advocate Jennifer Walsh joined the team, bringing specialized expertise in helping young witnesses navigate the legal system. She used play therapy techniques with dolls and simple stories to teach Emma fundamental concepts about truth and lies, good touches and bad touches, safe people and dangerous people. Truth helps people stay safe, Walsh explained gently during one session, using a dollhouse and toy figures to illustrate her point. When we tell the truth about what happened, the good people can protect us from the bad people. Emma listened intently, her small hand resting on Justice's golden fur. Truth keeps people safe, she repeated slowly, the concept clearly resonating in her developing understanding. The most crucial development came when renowned child psychologist Dr. Robert Kim arrived from UCLA to evaluate Emma's competency to testify. His assessment would determine whether a 3-year-old could legally take the witness stand in a California criminal court, a precedent that would echo through the legal system for years to come. Dr. Kim spent 3 hours with Emma over 2 days, conducting age-appropriate tests to evaluate her cognitive development, memory retention, and ability to distinguish between truth and fiction. His preliminary findings were encouraging but qualified. Emma demonstrates remarkable cognitive abilities for her age, he told the assembled legal team. Her memory is exceptionally detailed, and she shows clear understanding of cause and effect relationships. However, her trauma responses are severe, and her ability to function depends entirely on the presence of the therapy dog. The implications were staggering. If Emma were to testify, Justice would need to be present in the courtroom, an unprecedented accommodation that Stone would certainly challenge as prejudicial and improper. But as Dr. Torres watched Emma during her latest session, seeing the child's eyes light up when Justice entered the room and hearing her whisper, "Hello, friend," to her canine companion, she knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. Broken child was finding her way back to wholeness, one word at a time. The question now was whether the legal system would recognize that sometimes justice comes on four legs, with a gentle heart and an intuitive understanding of what it means to heal. Emma's voice was returning, but would the court allow her to use it when it mattered most? Time was running out, and everything depended on convincing a judge that a 3-year-old girl and her therapy dog could change the course of legal history forever. The Riverside County Courthouse buzzed with unprecedented tension as media vans lined the street and protesters gathered on the steps, their signs reading "Justice for Emma" and "Children's Voices Matter." Judge Patricia Williams had presided over family court for 20 years, handling thousands of cases involving abused children, but nothing had prepared her for the circus atmosphere surrounding Emma Rodriguez's competency hearing. Inside courtroom 4B, every seat was occupied by reporters, child advocacy groups, legal experts, and curious observers drawn by the historic nature of the proceedings. This wasn't just about one little girl's ability to testify. This was about fundamentally changing how the justice system treats its youngest and most vulnerable witnesses. Judge Williams, a stern woman with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing, called the court to order at precisely 9 a.m. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice cutting through the murmur of the packed gallery, "this hearing will determine whether 3-year-old Emma Rodriguez possesses the mental competency to provide testimony in a criminal proceeding. Given the unprecedented nature of this case, I will remind everyone that any disruptions will result in immediate removal from my courtroom." District Attorney Michael Harrison sat at the prosecution table, his usually confident demeanor tempered by the weight of responsibility. Beside him, child advocate Jennifer Walsh reviewed her notes one final time, knowing that Emma's future hung in the balance of the next few hours. Across the aisle, Rebecca Stone exuded cold confidence, her expensive suit imperfectly styled, hair projecting an image of legal invincibility. Dr. Robert Kim took the witness stand first, his credentials impressive, even by academic standards, professor of child psychology at UCLA, author of 3 books on childhood trauma, expert witness in over 200 cases involving young victims. His assessment of Emma would carry enormous weight in Judge Williams' decision. "Dr. Kim," Harrison began, his voice measured and professional, "in your expert opinion, does Emma Rodriguez possess the cognitive ability to provide reliable testimony?" Dr. Kim adjusted his glasses and consulted his detailed report. Despite experiencing severe trauma, Emma demonstrates remarkable cognitive abilities for her age. She consistently distinguishes between truth and lies during age-appropriate testing, shows clear understanding of cause and effect relationships, and retains detailed memories with surprising accuracy. Her vocabulary, while limited by her trauma-induced selective mutism, indicates normal to above-average intellectual development. Harrison nodded, feeling cautiously optimistic. "Can you explain the role of the therapy dog in Emma's communication?" "Justice provides what we call emotional scaffolding," Dr. Kim explained to the rapt courtroom. Emma's trauma created a psychological barrier between her experiences and her ability to vocalize them. The therapy dog's presence creates a safe, emotional space where she can access those memories without being overwhelmed by fear or panic responses. Stone rose for cross-examination like a predator sensing weakness. Her reputation as the shark was well-earned, built on her ability to shred opposing witnesses with surgical precision. She approached Dr. Kim with a smile that didn't reach her cold blue eyes. "Dr. Kim, Isn't it true that a 3-year-old's concept of reality is fundamentally different from an adult's? She began, her voice deceptively sweet. Children that age do have different cognitive frameworks, Dr. Kim acknowledged carefully. In fact, Stone continued, circling closer, 3-year-olds regularly confuse dreams with reality, create elaborate fantasy narratives, and are highly susceptible to suggestion, correct? That can occur, but in Emma's case, yes or no? Doctor, are 3-year-olds generally prone to fantasy and suggestion? Dr. Kim's jaw tightened. In general terms, yes, but no further questions. Stone cut him off triumphantly, leaving his explanation hanging unfinished. The courtrooms. Atmosphere shifted as Sofia Rodriguez took the stand, her hands shaking as she was sworn in. Emma's mother looked fragile and haunted, worn down by months of guilt and grief. Harrison approached her gently, knowing her testimony was crucial, but potentially devastating. Mrs. Rodriguez, can you describe Emma's personality before the abuse began? Harrison asked softly. Sophia's voice broke as she began to speak. She was pure sunshine. Emma never stopped talking. She'd chatter from the moment she woke up until she fell asleep. She'd tell me stories about her dreams, sing songs she'd make up, ask a million questions about everything she saw. Tears streamed down Sophia's face. As she continued, she loved people. Emma would talk to strangers in grocery stores, wave at everyone we passed on walks. She had no fear, no suspicion. She believed everyone was good and kind, because that's all she'd ever known from me. When did you notice changes in her behavior? About 2 months after I married Marcus, Sophia whispered. The nightmare started first. Then she became clingy. Wouldn't let me out of her sight. She stopped singing, stopped asking questions. I thought it was just adjustment to having a new father figure, but double quotes, she dissolved into sobs. Stone's cross-examination was brutal and calculated. Mrs. Rodriguez, you work 2 jobs and leave Emma alone with various caregivers for up to 12 hours a day, correct? I have to work to support us, Sophia replied defensively. So you're admitting you have no first-hand knowledge of what happens to Emma during most of her waking hours? I trusted Marcus too. You trusted a man you'd known for less than a year to care for your daughter unsupervised for 12 hours daily? Stone's voice dripped with manufactured incredulity. Objection, argumentative, Harrison called out. Sustained, Judge Williams ruled, but the damage was done. The moment everyone had been waiting for arrived, when Emma herself was brought into the courtroom. The tiny figure in her pink dress, clutching her one-eyed teddy bear, looked impossibly small in the imposing legal environment. Justice walked beside her, his golden presence providing the emotional anchor she needed. Judge Williams' voice softened, noticeably as she addressed Emma directly. Hello, sweetheart. My name is Judge Williams. Do you know why you're here today? Emma's voice was barely a whisper as she responded. To talk about the bad man. Can you tell me the difference between the truth and a lie? Emma nodded solemnly. Truth keeps people safe. Lies help bad people hurt. Stone immediately objected. To the dog's presence. Your Honor, this animal is clearly prejudicial. The jury will be unduly influenced by sympathy rather than facts. Judge Williams fixed Stone with a withering stare. Counselor, this dog isn't evidence, he's an accommodation. For a vulnerable witness, no different from a wheelchair ramp or sign language interpreter. The hearing continued for 3 more grueling hours, with expert witnesses, child development specialists, and legal scholars testifying about the precedent-setting nature of the case. Stone hammered away at Emma's age, her trauma, and the unprecedented nature of allowing therapy dog testimony. But as Judge Williams watched Emma answer simple questions clearly and consistently, always with Justice's reassuring presence beside her, she saw something that transcended legal technicalities. She saw a brave little girl who deserved to have her voice heard, regardless of her age. After deliberating through the night, Judge Williams returned to a packed courtroom the following morning. The tension was suffocating as she prepared to deliver a decision that would echo through legal history. After careful consideration of all testimony and evidence, she began, her voice carrying the weight of precedent. I find that Emma Rodriguez, despite her young age and traumatic experiences, demonstrates sufficient cognitive ability and understanding to provide competent testimony with appropriate safeguards in place. The courtroom erupted in cheers and gasps as advocates celebrated, and Stone's face turned ashen. Emma Rodriguez had won the right to tell her story. Now came the even greater challenge, finding the courage to face her abuser and speak the words that would either deliver justice or set a monster free. The competency war was over, but the real battle for Emma's voice was just beginning. Judge Williams' ruling sent shockwaves through the legal community, but for District Attorney Michael Harrison, victory in the competency hearing was just the beginning of an even more daunting challenge. Emma Rodriguez had won the right to testify, but now his team faced the monumental task of preparing a traumatized 3-year-old to face her abuser in open court, while the eyes of the nation watched. The transformation of Courtroom 3A began immediately after Judge Williams' decision. Harrison coordinated with court administration to create an environment that wouldn't overwhelm Emma's fragile psyche. Workers removed the imposing judge's bench, replacing it with a smaller, less intimidating version. The harsh fluorescent lighting was replaced with warmer, softer bulbs that cast a gentler glow across the room. Child-sized furniture was installed near the witness stand, and the jury box was repositioned to reduce the feeling of being surrounded by strangers. Dr. Amanda Torres worked around the clock with Emma, conducting practice sessions in the actual courtroom during evening hours when the building was empty. The first time Emma entered the transformed space, she froze in the doorway, overwhelmed by the sheer size and formality of the environment. Even with justice beside her, the room felt like a cavern designed to swallow small voices. It's very big, isn't it? Dr. Torres said gently, kneeling to Emma's eye level. But look, they made special chairs just for you, and Justice can sit right here beside you the whole time. Emma's eyes darted nervously around the courtroom, taking in the gallery seating, the court reporter station, and the defense table, where she would eventually have to look at Marcus Webb. Her breathing quickened, and for a moment, Dr. Torres feared they were asking too much of this brave little girl. But Justice, displaying his remarkable intuitive abilities, stepped forward and placed his large paw on Emma's small hand. The gesture was so gentle, so perfectly timed, that Emma's panic began to subside. Justice stays? She whispered. Justice stays, Dr. Torres confirmed. He'll be right there with you, just like always. Over the following days, Emma gradually became comfortable with the courtroom environment. She practiced sitting in the witness chair, speaking into the microphone. That had been adjusted to her height, and identifying people using photographs. Child advocate Jennifer Walsh used role-playing exercises to help Emma understand what would happen during her testimony. The nice man will ask you questions, Walsh explained, using dolls to represent the courtroom participants. And if you don't understand something, you can say, I don't know. Okay? That's a perfectly good answer. Emma nodded solemnly, absorbing every instruction with the seriousness of a child who understood that something very important was happening. Her vocabulary continued to expand during these sessions, though she still only spoke when Justice was present. The golden retriever had become more than a therapy dog. He was Emma's voice coach, her security blanket, and her bridge back to the world of the living. Meanwhile, Rebecca Stone's defense team worked furiously to undermine the prosecution's case. Stone filed emergency appeals challenging Judge Williams' ruling, arguing to higher courts that allowing a 3-year-old to testify with a therapy dog present violated her client's constitutional right to a fair trial. She painted the upcoming testimony as a circus designed to manipulate jurors' emotions rather than establish facts. Stone's strategy became clear during pre-trial motions. She would focus relentlessly on Emma's age, her trauma-induced memory, problems, and the allegedly prejudicial effect of Justice's presence. She brought in her own child psychology experts, who testified that 3-year-olds were incapable of reliable memory recall and were highly susceptible to suggestion from adults. This child has been coached for weeks by prosecution agents. Stone argued before Judge Williams. Every word she speaks will be the product of adult manipulation, not genuine memory. My client's freedom hangs in the balance of what amounts to a performance by a traumatized toddler and her prop dog. Harrison's team countered by bringing in additional experts who testified about the reliability of trauma memories in young children and the therapeutic benefits of animal-assisted testimony. Dr. Torres provided detailed documentation showing that Emma's statements had remained consistent across multiple sessions, with no evidence of coaching or suggestion. But it was Officer Maria Santos who provided the most compelling argument for Justice's continued presence. "This isn't about sympathy," she testified firmly. "Justice doesn't make Emma's testimony more or less truthful, he makes it possible. Without him, she simply cannot access the emotional strength needed to speak about her trauma." The weekend before trial brought unexpected crisis. Emma, perhaps sensing the magnitude of what lay ahead, experienced a severe setback. Saturday morning, she woke up screaming from a nightmare and refused to speak for the rest of the day. By Sunday, she had retreated so far into herself that even Justice's presence couldn't coax words from her lips. Dr. Torres called an emergency session, bringing Justice to Emma's foster home, where she had been staying with her Aunt Maria. The sight of Emma curled in a corner of the living room, unresponsive even to Justice's gentle approaches, filled everyone with dread. Had the pressure of impending testimony pushed her too far? Jennifer Walsh tried art therapy, spreading crayons and paper on the floor near Emma. For 2 hours, nothing happened. Then, slowly, Emma reached for a brown crayon and began to draw. The image that emerged was crude but unmistakable, a small figure holding hands with a large golden dog, standing together against a dark shadow. "Tell me about your picture," Dr. Torres said softly. Emma's voice was barely a whisper, but it was there. "Me and Justice. We're brave together." The breakthrough moment came when Dr. Torres made a crucial realization. "Emma," she said carefully, "you know that Justice will be with you in the big room, right? When you talk about what happened, Justice will be right there beside you." Emma looked up for the first time all weekend, her dark eyes searching Dr. Torres' face for confirmation. "Promise?" "I promise. Justice will never leave your side." That simple promise seemed to restore Emma's fragile courage. By Sunday evening, she was speaking in short sentences again, and by Monday morning, she was ready to face the greatest challenge of her young life. The final preparation session took place in Courtroom 3A on the evening before testimony. Emma sat in the witness chair with Justice beside her, practicing her responses one last time. When asked to point to where the bad man would sit, she extended her small finger toward the defense table without hesitation. "Are you ready to tell everyone what happened?" Dr. Torres asked gently. Emma looked at Justice, then back at Dr. Torres, and nodded with a determination that belied her 3 years. "Justice and me are ready." As the team prepared to leave that night, Harrison paused to watch Emma walking hand in paw with Justice toward the exit. Tomorrow, this remarkable little girl would face her abuser in a battle between innocence and evil, truth and deception, justice and corruption. The entire legal system would be watching, waiting to see if a 3-year-old's voice could be strong enough to pierce through years of legal precedent and procedural obstacles. The preparation was complete. Now came the real test whether Emma Rodriguez and her golden guardian could change the course of justice forever. Tuesday morning arrived with the weight of destiny pressing down on everyone involved in People vs. Marcus Webb. Outside the Riverside County Courthouse, protesters had gathered before dawn, their signs reading, "Believe Emma," and "Children's Voices Matter," while news vans lined the street with satellite dishes reaching toward the gray sky like mechanical prayers for justice. Inside Courtroom 3A, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation and dread. Every seat was occupied, despite Judge Williams' strict limitations on attendance. Child advocacy groups filled the gallery, their representatives clutching tissues and holding their collective breath. Legal experts from across the country had traveled to witness what many believed would be a landmark moment in jurisprudence. District Attorney Michael Harrison adjusted his tie for the 10th time, his usual courtroom confidence tempered by the enormity of what was about to unfold. At the defense table, Marcus Webb sat in his pressed orange jumpsuit, his cold eyes scanning the room with the same calculating intelligence that had made him such a successful predator. Beside him, Rebecca Stone reviewed her notes with predatory focus, ready to destroy a 3-year-old's credibility with surgical precision. At 9:15 a.m., a side door opened, and a collective gasp rippled through the courtroom as Emma Rodriguez entered with justice at her side. The tiny girl wore a pink dress that her aunt had carefully chosen, her dark hair pulled back with a matching ribbon. In her free hand, she clutched her one-eyed teddy bear like a talisman against the evil that awaited her. Justice Magnificent, in his blue service vest, moved with purposeful dignity as he guided Emma toward the witness stand. His training had prepared him for this moment. He could sense the tension in the air, the overwhelming emotions of 300 people focused on his small companion. His presence radiated calm authority as he took his position beside Emma's chair. Judge Williams called the court to order, her voice cutting through the murmur of the packed gallery. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to hear testimony from our youngest witness. I will remind everyone that any disruptions will result in immediate removal from my courtroom. The dignity and protection of this child supersedes all other considerations." Emma was sworn in using a modified oath, appropriate for her age, promising to tell the truth in words she could understand. Her small voice, amplified by the courtroom's sound system, seemed to fill every corner of the imposing space as she answered Judge Williams' preliminary questions about her name, age, and understanding of truth versus lies. Harrison approached the witness stand with the careful movements of someone defusing a bomb. His voice was gentle, almost parental, as he began his direct examination. "Emma, do you know why you're here today?" "To talk about the bad man," she replied, her words clear despite their childish simplicity. "Can you tell us about your family?" Emma's face brightened slightly as she spoke about her mother Sophia, describing their small apartment and her favorite toys. Justice remained motionless beside her, a golden anchor in the storm of legal proceedings. When Harrison showed her photographs of family members, Emma identified each one with growing confidence. Then came the moment everyone had been dreading. Harrison lifted a photograph of Marcus Webb, his hand trembling almost imperceptibly. "Emma, do you recognize this person?" The change in Emma was immediate and heartbreaking. Her small body tensed, her breathing quickened, and she pressed herself back in the witness chair. Justice, sensing her distress, moved closer until his large head rested against her arm. The contact seemed to ground her, providing the emotional stability she needed to continue. "That's the bad man," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Despite the amplification, "Where did you know him from?" "He lived in my house with Mommy and me." Harrison's questions continued with excruciating care, each one designed to elicit crucial testimony without re-traumatizing the child. Emma described, in her limited vocabulary, the progression from kindness to cruelty that had characterized Webb's abuse. Her answers were simple, but devastating in their honesty. "Did Marcus ever hurt you, Emma?" "Yes. How did he hurt you?" Emma's hand found Justice's fur, her fingers tangling in the golden strands as she gathered courage. "He burned me with the fire stick. He hit me. He said bad words and made me scared." The courtroom was silent, except for the occasional suppressed sob from the gallery. Webb's face remained impassive, but those who knew him well could see the mask beginning to crack as his victim's words demolished his carefully constructed facade. Harrison's final questions approached the heart of the matter. "Emma, when Marcus hurt you, did he tell you anything about telling other people?" "He said, if I told, they would take Mommy away forever. He said nobody would believe me because I'm little." The manipulation was laid bare in those few words. A predator's calculated psychological control over his victim, designed to ensure silence through fear and isolation. The jury, many wiping away tears, saw the truth that no amount of legal maneuvering could obscure. As Harrison concluded his direct examination, Rebecca Stone rose like a shark sensing blood in the water. Her reputation had been built on moments like this, destroying opposing witnesses through relentless cross-examination. But as she approached the witness stand, something unprecedented happened. Justice, who had remained perfectly still throughout Harrison's questioning, suddenly stood and positioned himself between Stone and Emma. It wasn't aggressive behavior. The dog showed no signs of hostility, but his message was clear. He would protect his charge from any threat, real or perceived. "Your Honor," Stone objected, her voice sharp with frustration. "The animal is clearly interfering with my right to cross-examine this witness." Judge Williams studied the scene before her, a massive golden retriever standing guard over a terrified 3-year-old, a defense attorney whose aggressive reputation had met its match in canine loyalty. "A dog may remain in position, Counselor. You may proceed with your cross-examination." Stone's carefully planned attack crumbled before it began. How do you aggressively question a witness protected by a therapy dog while 300 people watch her every move? How do you attack a 3-year-old's credibility when her simple honesty shines like a beacon in the courtroom's artificial light? "Emma," Stone began, her voice forced into an unnatural sweetness, "you said Marcus was mean to you. But sometimes grown-ups have to discipline children, don't they?" Emma looked confused by the complex language, then turned to Justice as if seeking guidance. The dog's steady presence seemed to give her strength. "He hurt me," she said simply. "That's bad." Stone tried several more approaches, but each question met the same devastating simplicity. Emma's truth was unassailable because it was uncomplicated by adult deceptions or legal technicalities. She knew the difference between discipline and abuse, between accidents and intentional cruelty, between fear and safety. As the cross-examination faltered, Webb's composure finally cracked. The man who had terrorized a child in the darkness of her bedroom couldn't maintain his facade under the bright lights of justice. His hands began to shake, sweat beaded on his forehead, and his breathing became labored. The moment had arrived for the question that would define everything. Harrison stood for redirect examination, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether justice would prevail or crumble under the weight of legal technicalities. The entire courtroom held its breath as Harrison approached Emma one final time, knowing that her answer would echo through legal history and determine the fate of both victim and predator. The silence in courtroom 3A was so profound that the faint hum of the ventilation system sounded like thunder. 300 people held their breath as District Attorney Michael Harrison approached the witness stand where Emma Rodriguez sat. With Justice at her side, her small hand resting on the golden retriever's head like she was drawing strength from his very soul. Harrison's voice was barely above a whisper when he asked the question that would echo through legal history. "Emma, Can you point to the person who hurt you? Time seemed suspended as Emma's dark eyes moved slowly across the courtroom. She looked at the jury, their faces etched with concern and compassion. She glanced at the gallery where child advocates sat forward in their seats. Her gaze swept over the court reporter, the bailiff, Judge Williams herself. And then, inevitably, her eyes found Marcus Webb. Webb sat frozen at the defense table, his orange jumpsuit a stark reminder of his fallen status. Gone was the charming stepfather who had brought flowers to a trusting little girl. Gone was the manipulative predator who had convinced a child that silence was her only option. In his place sat a man whose very existence had been reduced to this single moment waiting for a 3-year-old's judgment. Emma's tiny finger began to rise, trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. Justice, sensing the monumental nature of the moment, pressed closer to her chair, his warm presence radiating the unconditional love and protection that had given this broken child the courage to find her voice. The finger pointed directly at Marcus Webb with unwavering certainty. Bad man. The words hit the courtroom like a physical force. 2 simple syllables that carried the weight of justice, the power of truth, and the unbreakable spirit of a child who had survived hell itself. Emma's voice rang clear through the amplification system, each letter precise and devastating. Bad man. The reaction was instantaneous and overwhelming. Gasps echoed through the gallery as observers struggled to contain their emotions. Jurors openly wept, their professional detachment shattered by the pure honesty of a 3-year-old's testimony. Even the court reporter's fingers trembled as she transcribed the words that would become legal legend. But it was Marcus Webb's reaction that truly revealed the power of Emma's simple truth. The man who had maintained his innocence through months of interrogations, who had smirked through police interviews and whispered threats to prosecutors, completely crumbled. His face went ashen, his hands began to shake uncontrollably, and his breathing became rapid and shallow. The careful mask he had worn for so long shattered like glass against the bedrock of a child's honesty. She's lying. Webb suddenly screamed, lunging forward in his chair before bailiffs restrained him. She's just a baby. She doesn't know what she's saying. His voice cracked with desperation as the facade of his innocence disintegrated before 300 witnesses. Judge Williams gavelled for order, but Emma wasn't finished. Drawing strength from Justice's unwavering presence, she continued speaking, her small voice cutting through the chaos. He hurt me with fire. He said bad words. He made me scared all the time. Rebecca Stone, the feared defense attorney known as the Shark, sat paralyzed at her table. Her carefully planned cross-examination strategies lay in ruins, demolished by the unassailable truth of a 3-year-old's testimony. How do you argue with innocence? How do you cross-examine honesty itself? The prosecution had anticipated that Stone would attempt to discredit Emma's testimony, but they hadn't prepared for the complete collapse of the defense's case. Webb's outburst had accomplished what hours of expert testimony could not have had, revealed his true character to the jury in a moment of unguarded rage. Dr. Amanda Torres, watching from the gallery, felt tears streaming down her face as she witnessed the culmination of weeks of patient therapy. Emma had not only found her voice, she had used it to speak truth to power in the most profound way imaginable. Justice, the golden retriever who had served as her bridge back to the world of the living, remained steadfast at her side, his presence a testament to the healing power of unconditional love. Harrison, recognizing that Emma's testimony had transcended all expectations, made the decision to end his examination on that powerful note. "No further questions, Your Honor," he announced, his voice thick with emotion. Stone attempted to salvage her case through cross-examination, but the effort was futile. Every question she posed met the same devastating simplicity that had characterized Emma's testimony throughout. When Stone tried to suggest that Emma's memories were unreliable, the child simply responded, "He was mean to me. I remember." The jury needed only 90 minutes to deliberate, a remarkably short time for such a complex case. When they returned, the foreman's voice was steady and certain. Guilty on all counts. Webb's sentencing 3 weeks later drew an even larger crowd than the trial itself. Judge Williams, in her final act in this historic case, sentenced him to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. "Mr. Webb," she said, looking directly at the broken man before her, "you underestimated the strength of the human spirit and the power of truth. A 3-year-old child has accomplished what your expensive lawyers could not. She has shown this court exactly who you are." The impact of Emma's testimony extended far beyond Webb's conviction. Within 6 months, the California legislature had passed Emma's law, expanding protections for child witnesses and formally recognizing the use of therapy animals in courtrooms. 43 other states followed suit, creating a legal revolution that would protect thousands of young victims for generations to come. Dr. Torres continued working with Emma for another year, documenting her remarkable recovery. The silent, traumatized child who had entered therapy 6 months earlier gradually transformed into a vibrant, talkative little girl who loved to tell stories and ask endless questions about the world around her. Justice remained her special friend, visiting regularly even after formal therapy ended. On a sunny afternoon 1 year after the trial, Emma sat in the playground behind the Children's Advocacy Center, throwing a tennis ball for Justice to retrieve. Her laughter carried on the breeze, a sound that had once seemed impossible, but now rang out like music. "What happened to the bad man?" she asked Dr. Torres during one of their final sessions. "He's in a place where he can't hurt anyone anymore," Dr. Torres replied gently. Emma nodded with the satisfied wisdom of a child who had faced evil and emerged victorious. "Good. Justice and me, we are brave." Indeed, they were. 2 words, bad man, had changed legal history, delivered justice for a broken child, and proved that truth, no matter how young or small its voice, will always triumph over darkness. Emma Rodriguez had found her voice, and the world would never be the same.